Welcome. Welcome everyone. I'm Meg, for those of you who don't know me. I work for Fashion Roundtable and I'm their slow fashion policy expert with a particular interest in Wales, as I'm based in rural North Wales. And I'm currently leading on their wool regeneration project. So the purpose of this roundtable specifically is an opportunity for us, I suppose, for an open and collaborative discussion. We're going to be talking about some of the issues within the fashion supply chain specifically today. We have 7 speakers coming on, so I don't want to hold up too much of your time because they're going to sort of be discussing the supply chain in more depth. However, our objective at Fashion Roundtable has always been to provide a full-scale mapping of the sector. We sort of feel that while there's a lot of diversity, there's also quite a bit of fragmentation currently, and we'd really like to focus on sort of policy as a way of threading this together with a little bit more care. And we're also going to be working very closely with craft and localism in mind. So I'll leave it at that for today, but the first speaker that we have is Jenny, and she's going to be talking about the next steps with her project, and she's from Fashion Enter.
Thank you very much, Meg. Hi everybody, nice to meet you. I'm going to just share my screen. Or do you have to let me share?
Yeah, we'll need to add you as a collaborator. Is that all right from your end, Ellen and Sianed?
Can you do it?
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to do this one. I mean, I don't want to bore you all. This is just an overview of the company. If you want more information, just let me know, because I could easily send it to you. What I will do is go straight on to the project that we've done with wool. As a way of an overview of the company, I'm the CEO and founder. It's 17 years old. We're a social enterprise. We're very unusual, so we concentrate on 2 objectives. One is production and the other is education. And we have various sites in the UK. We have different campuses. We are actually based in Newtown in mid Wales, which is the most amazing part of this world. And we have a factory there due to the sad demise of Lord Rashley. We just couldn't let all that staff go. And actually the interest in wool, just going to go on to the next slide. So the interest in wool is because of that lady there. That lady is a shepherdess. Her name is Jean Balmer. I've known her like 40 years. She's an amazing, well, 35 years, and she's an amazing woman. And a couple of years ago, I saw all these fleeces rotting on her farm and just couldn't believe it, just could not believe that this took place. So, you know, that's genuinely how it started. I'm an ex-senior buyer from Arcadia and also from Marks and Spencer. So we're very well connected in retail in particular. And what I wanted to do was get commercialisation of some way to make sure that we could use a Welsh wool product. We had a little bit of training funding from the Welsh government to open up in Newtown. And so we've got links with the Welsh government, but we've also really joined forces with Powys Council, great people that are working at the ground there. We did loads of desktops. I mean, there's so much about wool going on. There are so many groups. I totally agree with you, Meg, when you say it's very fragmented. It's just taken us forever to get our heads around it. But what we did was we went to Smart Cymreig, and they gave us a tiny grant. And I do mean tiny, very, very tiny. And they basically said, see what you can deliver. We were given a garment from a retailer, which was a wool blend skirt, and it's a heavyweight wool blend skirt, quite coarse. And that's what we use as our benchmark. Our aim was to see if we could get a yarn that had got a minimum 50% wool content to be able to make into our commercial garment. We had 3 months to deliver this project and a tiny bit of money. So it was a very, very big ask. So that's all the desktop research, as I said. And then we really wanted to work. I go back a long way with I don't know why that's happened. I don't know if that's me. But we joined up forces with Meg and Tamara very early, and so any of the future work we're doing, we want to work alongside them. And we conducted a huge review, not just of wool, but about, you know, we are garment manufacturers. We're making 30,000 garments a week. All right, that's with our 3 units in London and our 1 unit in Newtown. There is end producer responsibilities coming our way. It is already in France, and we know DEFRA are working on the policy now. We have to think about recycling and how we're going to use SNR, synthetic nylon rummage, and obviously PET as well, which is the plastic fibres. So, you know, we're trying to be proactive. We started off by looking at 50% Welsh wool, 50% recycled wool, but actually that is being done, you know, so we wanted to do something different. So we started off by going, looking at recycling. So we've got quite good contacts there. And then we went to Amsterdam, which actually blew my mind. Like, I did not realise how advanced now recycling is. You know, there is so much opportunity whereby we can look at pre-sorting garments, and we are now talking to the Welsh Government about a recycling project as well, on top of the wool project. So I don't know if you're aware, but everyone says how difficult it is to do recycling because of mixed fibre content. But actually the Samaritans, for example, have got a state-of-the-art machine whereby the camera is so big and so powerful, light will redirect off the yarn, so you actually know what those yarns are. In addition to that, you can also do colour sort, which is why you're seeing sort of a cage there that are red colours. So all this technology is moving at a dramatic pace. Oops. So we teamed up with potters. The guy I'm working with is a guy called Richard. He's an engineer by trade, and actually, oh, there he is, at the bottom right-hand corner. The Potter Group is one of the largest employers in Welshpool. Great company. Richard himself is one of those very logical engineers, so he was fantastic on the project. And that's what I was saying about the Prato model, where it's 50% reclaimed wool and 50% virgin wool. But actually, we moved away from that. We then worked and engaged with various universities. I did find the costs from the universities extraordinarily expensive. You know, I thought there was funding available to support the projects that typically we're doing, but that is not the case. So you can see that we got to the point where we found Sue, who gave us yarns of wool. So we worked alongside her. She's the only one person I could find in Wales. And then you can see the slivers there that being produced. This took so much time to get here. Now, this is weeks of work that I'm sort of shortcutting to. But the top right-hand corner is the success of the project, because that was a yarn that is mixed fibre, 50%, which is PET and synthetic nylon rummage, and 50% Welsh wool. Now, we all know that it's a short staple fibre, it's a short staple with the Welsh wool. But we did find it to be really strong, and we didn't expect that. Like we found that there is, you know, definitely properties that are more advantageous than we thought when we first started the project. And whilst we didn't get to woven, we did get to jersey, knitted, sorry, not jersey. We wanted to finish up with a woven swatch using this yarn, but the university said that they didn't have time to do it because it was such a short time frame. So we were very encouraged with the properties of Welsh wool, and so encouraged that, oh, this is the wrong way around actually, but that's PET, that is shredded plastic bottles. I'm sure you all know that. And we ended up working with Leeds University for that. I would have personally have preferred to work with the Welsh University, but there wasn't the time scale, and actually Leeds were better equipped and set up. And that was the final resulting yarn that we had, which was knitted up. And we've shown that to 2 retailers, one of which expressed that they could definitely use that in a menswear product, which we were encouraged by. But the project was too short a lead time. We'd actually submitted in 18 months, and it took about 15 months for it to be approved. And then the lead time just gave us that 3 months. But it proves it can work. And we have gone back, and Smart has finished now, but there is more funding coming through. We've been told, well, the full report, which is about 50 pages long, and credit to Richard, that has been submitted. We're on draft number 3. As soon as that is ready, it will be released out to the public anyway. But everybody was encouraged. We are 95% certain that there will be more funding now to carry on with what we started. What we need to do is to test that. We need to test the tensile strength of that yarn. We need to look at dyeing properties. We need to look at dry rub test, wet rub test, snagging. I mean, of course, it's going to snag like that. So we will continue, but the aim is to go back to that woven aim that we wanted to do, and that's where we believe the commerciality is. There is a multinational that is also expressing interest. I can't say who it is at the moment, but they're not a UK-based company, and they were delighted with what they saw, and they also came to Wales and met the Welsh Government, and also they met with Powys County Council. So their backing would be strongly appreciated, on top of the 2 retailers that we're working with at the moment. And I think that's it in a nutshell. As I said, I find the landscape incredibly confusing. I find it quite cluttered. I think there's lots of people with lots of tins looking for money. We way overspent on budget to get to that, but I didn't really care. We are a social enterprise. We are not for profit, and I was doing it more for Jean, because I kept on thinking, you know, it's the farmers that need the help here. So that's where we're up to at the moment. We're expecting final feedback on the draft report by, I'm going to say, mid-September, absolute latest. And as I said, as soon as that's approved, it will go out to the general public. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me directly on this, or if you want to come and see us in Wales, you're very, very welcome. And I will pop my email address in the chat.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny. That's brilliant.
Pleasure.
Fab. Okay, so we're going to move on now to Melon Trigwynt. I think I saw Avion and...
Yeah, we're here.
Hi.
Yeah.
And they're going to talk now about the realities of operating a Welsh mill in Wales.
Good grief. There's a phrase, well, I wouldn't start from here, and that's probably very apt.
It's going to be the title of our autobiography when we get around to writing it.
Yeah, fair.
Probably should mention, I think, because we probably represent the mill in Wales, or the mills of Wales, and we should perhaps mention a little bit of history. We ourselves, it's a third family, third generation mill. My grandfather started it in 1912, and really the context of when he started it, in 1895 there were 300 mills. In 1912, when my grandfather bought the mill, there were 250 mills. In 1981, when I came back into the business, there were 26 mills. And today, I've got here, there are less than 10 left, but to be honest, I've got these notes for presentations that I've done a couple of times about the history of the mill, and I suspect that it's now down to probably the fingers of one hand. I'm not absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't have the critical mass here for to introduce. I personally don't think we have the critical mass to introduce dyeing plants or finishing plants for the weaving industry. Put it like that, because the weaving industry in the UK is based in Yorkshire, and that's where most of our supplies currently come from. Originally, going back in history again, most Welsh mills, well, the Welsh woolen industry went through periods of decline and periods of really very, very good business. At the time my grandfather bought it, parts of the Welsh wool industry were doing really, really well, supplying flannel to the steelworks, the coal mines, the army, various people like that, on quite a large scale. So it was an industry. It wasn't a sort of quaint rural, craft. But all that came to a shuddering end at the end of the First World War, when the government was sitting on stocks. And I think, if I remember, I probably can't find the figures immediately, as usual. Yes, there were some. Yeah. Surplus stock released by the government led to a fall in the price of wool from 54 pence a pound, that's the old pennies, to 7 pence a pound. So, the industry couldn't really withstand this. So most of the industry that was involved in that sort of industrialized supply chain vanished. Mills disappeared overnight. But ours was a very rural business and a very different sort of business. So we survived. And the mills that did survive depended very heavily on the tourist industry. And by the time, in effect, that I was conscious of the family business, things had changed quite a lot. Our mill was originally a pandy or fulling mill, so we would have been processing the wool probably for the farmers in the immediate area to actually weave themselves or knit themselves. But by the time my grandfather had been in the business for a while, the mill was definitely a weaving mill. And that aspect, that fulling and processing of the wool the initial processing of the wool had disappeared. We kept spinning, and carding and spinning were still done in the mill up until the mid-60s, I'd say. We had the machines. But my father felt that since we were sending the wool away to be washed anyway,
the scouring,
yes, the scouring, to be scoured and washed, that it seemed fairly pointless to then do the rest of that initial process. So in about the late 60s, we got rid of the carding and the spinning machines and introduced more looms, which made perfect economic sense. The other big change would have been when the link with the local producers of wool, the local farmers, was broken in the 1950s. My grandfather didn't like this because when he first started, he was involved in processing wool for the local farmers. And obviously we were very connected to that local supply chain. But the Wool Marketing Board, in effect, made that no longer possible by making it illegal to buy direct from the farmer. And so for us, it was actually an advantage. And my father was a good businessman, saw this, and he could see that we would then be able to buy the wool when we wanted. We could buy the quality of wool that we wanted, which was the reason that the Wool Marketing Board did what they did, was that they were concerned about the quality of wool. They wanted to improve it, and that's perfectly understandable. But I think that supply chain, that local supply chain, was broken at that point. And if I went forward a couple of years to when there were a handful of mills left, we were all making Welsh doublecloth, Welsh tapestry as it was called. And we were all buying the wool from a company in Yorkshire called Brierley Brothers. And we were buying it in bulk. we were having it dyed. Each individual mill was having its own colours dyed, and we were working on that basis. So the quality of the wool in each mill was very similar. Interestingly enough, this help given to us by the Rural Industries Board was they employed a designer which worked with all the Welsh mills. Sounds like a good idea until you realise one designer working with all the mills. So again, there was an issue with, how can I say, most of the product coming out from the mills was very, very similar. So the only thing that the mills could compete with was price, which meant that in many cases, they were being driven into a downward spiral as far as prices were concerned. I'm talking now about a long time ago.
Can I just sort of add in the one interesting thing about that arrangement where everybody was buying their 214 Yorkshire count from this one spinner was that there was actually a sort of slightly larger circular economy developing, because all the mills bought from the same supplier. So they had a lorry run into Wales once a week, which would deliver yarn and will pick up finished cloth for people to have processed at the other end. So it was quite interesting that actually did support itself to a certain extent. Yeah. And I think the biggest issue really came when we split away from that, because they went, they closed eventually. Yes. And we started looking at just-in-time yarns, which were very often clean yarns, and we weren't actually weaving on the dog cross looms. So the whole business model kind of shifted slightly.
When we changed our looms from shuttle looms, dog cross can accept most yarns of quite varying qualities. But we'd moved over to Summit looms, and they need a certain element of consistency in the yarn. So we found that in many cases, we couldn't use the wool that we used to use. So we ended up using yarn still in oil, which is easier to use with modern looms, and then processing it, washing it and finishing it afterwards, which was quite unusual for Welsh double cloth, because was normally finished off the loom. So to a certain extent, we disrupted the industry somewhat at that point by introducing a new quality. It was successful, and we continued that way. So we were a little mini version of, you might say, globalization and outsourcing and buying just in time from large spinners who had wide selection of colors, everything that we needed. That's changed, partly because of Brexit, partly because of COVID, partly because of all sorts of things. The supply chains now are being stressed.
I think so. I think we were conscious a few years ago that people are very interested in provenance, quite rightly. So that's, and obviously the work we did with Susie on Cambrian, just reinforced our belief that, the more we could do that we could, was attributable, the better for us, for the industry and for the brand. Having said that, it's a difficult transition, and we are in transition at the moment. We're trying to work with a broader base of suppliers with different qualities of yarn. Again, we're still looking at the moment at stock service, but I think we're increasingly coming round to sort of almost going back to where we were 40, 50 years ago, of actually buying in bulk. Fortunate, because we produce in bulk, so we've got the buying power to actually commit to, let's say, 5 tons 3 or 4 times a year, and actually commissioning that to be made for us in colour, either dyed in the wool or solid dyed. So, for us, we're going through, if you like, a whole new learning curve. But one of the things that has sprung up for us, that if we get to that stage, then it would be great for us if we could start to specify the blend in the yarn. And if there's anything we can do there, obviously, that will incorporate Welsh or British, then that's obviously top of our agenda.
We have worked with Susie and Cambrian with specifically Welsh yarn, and that's worked fine, and it's a nice quality yarn, and we've made some really good things with it, and we've made some fabrics which the BBC used in their Cardiff headquarters, and we've got some nice upholstery fabrics, and it also it's good stuff. The issue is, as Mandy said, the quantities that we require in a stock supported range are bigger than we can get from that particular source. So we have to think about that as a limited edition, which isn't a problem. We can do that, and in many respects, it's a good marketing ploy anyway. But it would be great if we could be in a position where this is something that is stock supported, or that in sufficient quantities that we can run with it as our base yarn.
And obviously, you know, if we could collaborate with other people, then, you know, we could increase those quantities. And that, I think, is, you know, is probably one of the ways forward, because I think one of the big changes, you know, for me, is that people are more prepared to share ideas and information and work together than they were 30, 40 years ago, where everybody was trying to keep their business close to their chest and not let anybody else know what they were getting up to. So there are possibilities, I think, and certainly, you know, it's lovely to have the Cambrian as our premium product, and you know, we're developing a range for next year, but that is very sort of, we're not in the position yet where it's a sort of flowing through thing. It's a cycle every time, and every time there seems to be a new cycle.
We're in the process, we're in an intermediate process where we're looking at stock supported UK spun yarns, both wool, and it would be great to have lamb's wool. Lamb's wool is incredibly difficult to have UK sourced, but we can have UK spun lamb's wool. But so we're in a sort of halfway house, yes.
But we're not quite where we want to be. So, you know, obviously the project is really timely for us, because if there's any way we can work with other people to develop what we want quicker by pooling expertise, knowledge and information, then that's got to be great. And it's, you know, the end result is great for farmers too, and getting a better price for the wool. And
one of the people we have been working on with it is a guy we've worked with. He was a supplier not so long ago, and he's now left the actual spinning company and he's become a yarn consultant. So we found him very useful, because he understands the technicalities and the requirements of our requirements, and how to achieve that through working on the base cloth, base yarn. The other point I quite like to pick up is what Jenny was talking about recycling. I mean, obviously, you know, that's an issue for us too. We're doing work with our selvage at the moment, which seems to be working. But we obviously have quite a lot of, you know, at the end of a run, we have all the loose ends where one warp is tied onto another. We have scraps, we have waste. So we have been sorting it by colour ourselves and storing it in our own selection of wonderful storage containers. And we're working with a company up in Yorkshire who are, I think they have funding, I think they work with Cymreig, and they're actually looking to process 50% of our waste, 50% virgin wool, to create a yarn which we can either use for knitting or weaving. My personal preference, I think, is for weaving, but it's really interesting, because our free waste mixed with virgin wool is coming out as expensive as buying brand new 100% virgin wool. So it's you know, we're going through the motions. We're going to do the experiment. We're going to see what we can do with it, but it's going to have to be sold as a premium product, because it's recycled, not, as people often think, that you're reprocessing, so it's going to be a lower value product. It's going to actually be higher value. As a sort of final thing from us, one of the things that we have to think about, because we are right next to the market, I mean, our advantage is being very close to the final market, but we've also, obviously, when we're looking at these, we have to make a judgment as to what the market will take. So if we wanted to be completely Welsh, for example, we need then to check, well, do we have a market for completely Welsh product? And if we do, how much are they prepared to pay for it? There are occasions when the market is there. And for example, the BBC wanted to have something very Welsh for their headquarters in Cardiff. But that market isn't necessarily there all the time for that sort of premium product. So that aspect of it is very important, because if we go down the road, all of us, to produce something, it has to be something that the market wants. I think that's probably
that's a great final point. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you.
No, that was a great final point. Thank you very much.
Right, cheers.
Fantastic. There'll be some questions sort of at the end, but thank you very much. We'll move on to Susie now, because you've just been speaking about Cambrian wool, and she's going to just discuss a little bit more about your collaboration.
Hi everybody, thank you for inviting me, and thank you Amanda and Avion and Jenny. Hi, I don't know if you remember, we met years ago when I was running the apprenticeship programme at Carmarthen College, and Avion and Mandy had a student there as well, so yeah, we came up to see you when you were in London.
I didn't, Susie.
You didn't? Did you not make the connection?
I didn't know. And now you said you haven't changed.
Oh, a bit older, a bit grayer. Anyway, it's lovely to see you here, and it's really exciting that you're now up in North Wales. So that's great that you've brought all of that up there. And I did actually speak to your guy from the recycling plant as well.
Yeah,
so
you are the one.
Pardon?
You are the one I was talking about.
Wonderful. Well, I'm just going to give you a tiny, if I can, brief journey about, the journey of Cambrian wool, just so that anyone who doesn't know sort of knows where we sit, and where we're sort of trying to go. Again, going back on what Avion and Mandy have said, whilst the project originally was to look at a commercially viable yarn, or Welsh wool yarn, we are still very tiny in that whole apart, in the industry basically, but we are doing what we're doing, and it's all very, very slow little steps. But the original initiative started via Prince Charles. I don't know if you're aware, and he had different rural initiatives going on around the country in Mid Wales, Dartmoor, the Peak District and the Northern Highlands, and he was basically looking at developing rural economy in those areas. So the Cambrian Mountains region was chosen, and when we were first made aware of the project, there were lots of different products like beef, lamb, beer, chocolate and that sort of thing, but that were being produced, and wool obviously became a central sort of interest. At that particular time, I was involved in the Textiles Technologies project at Carmarthen College. I was running a project there where I was working with Welsh fashion and textile industries, and we sort of hooked onto the whole wool story way back when. I can't even remember how long ago it is, quite a long time ago, and I ran a couple of seminars based on why wool was the sort of start of it, and we ran a very unscientific little questionnaire at the first Llandudbury Sheep Festival, where we asked sort of people, what their opinions were about wool, and I was involved then as well with a small group of mainly women, designers, sheep farmers, people who were interested in wool. We had a little wool group that we used to meet occasionally, and when the Cambrian Mountains Initiative was then formed, we were invited along to come and help. We had quite a lot of expertise amongst the group, and we were invited to come into the initiative and actually help with their studies. In 2014, there was a feasibility study commissioned, and basically at that point in time, and things I know have moved on quite a lot, but at that point in time, Welsh wool was going from Wales into the depots, and then being going into British wool. So there was no way at that point of identifying the Welsh wool. So the project was all about seeing whether or not the Welsh wool could be have its our eye on it, go out of Wales and be processed and come back. So we work very closely as the group with the British Wool Marketing Board and also Curtis Direct, who buy and process wool. And we came up with a lovely quality of wool, which could be traced all the way out, processed and come all the way back again. So that was initially the sort of main project. Off the back of that, we then produced a woven fabric at Cambrian Mill, which is unfortunately now closed, but we had different qualities of wool, and we put out a design competition basically, which was international, and certain designs were chosen, and then those were touted around for a year. And so the whole sort of Cambrian wool and the traceability and what have you was sort of put out there. It all sort of culminated then in Prince Charles coming back to Nanteuos Mansion to see everybody and to meet everyone. So we were, as I say, involved in that. There was a product made, and then once the initiative, which was a community interest company, had finished, the basically it's sort of off you go, girls, here you are, here's some wool, you know, see what you can do with it. So Cambrian Mountains wool was then incorporated, and there were 4 of us who actually got going on that. And we produced a range of hand knit yarns, dyed, and sold those into retailers and at shows and that sort of thing. One of the interesting things that came out of that project was that we hadn't actually produced a weaving yarn, and would a weaving yarn, you know, could we produce that and successfully weave it? So that was when we collaborated with Mewn. Gwlân, as they said, were also interested in producing a 100% Welsh wool fibre for interiors, and they did that separately, and we produced another weaving yarn. There's a little bit of a, well, huge gap it seems now in between that happening, or the yarn being developed, and it actually getting on the machinery because of COVID. But eventually Mewn managed to do the samples for us, and we produced a lovely lightweight double cloth design, and Mewn are now sampling that further for their production capacity, along with the interiors yarn. When the sort of in COVID times, what have you, the other director of the initiative had decided that she would like to retire, and we had all been in a bit of a state of, you know, what we do with this, what we do with the business. So the business was sort of put on hold for a little bit whilst we got through COVID, and after that I've actually taken on the business separately. I have decided that the community side of the business was sort of a little difficult for me to manage, and so currently running it as a sole trader, but I do think that moving forward that sort of can change. So we're now in a position where I've commissioned, it was, you know, the gaps in the supply chain, and Ffasiwn and Mandy have alluded to it. It's a continual, it has to be a continual thing. You have to sort of buy yarn for the next season, and that had stopped. So just towards the back end or middle of last year, I had to take the decision, like, either we go ahead with this, I commit to some more yarn, or I think the whole sort of chain would have been broken. So that's what I've done. We've had more yarn in, and we've now got hand knitting yarn and some weaving yarn. I've been doing my own, or Cambrian Wool we've been doing our own work. I'm not allowed, unfortunately, to say all of the details, but we have been working with an iconic British brand to produce some blankets that they are going to be using the Welsh wool in, and I'm hoping that will elevate the whole Welsh wool story as well, when we're allowed to sort of talk about that. Ffasiwn and Mandy, obviously, you know, very high profile in terms of manufacturing in Wales, but obviously again with the sort of supply chain there, we know that the mill situation is very much reduced, and unfortunately I was pushing very hard to get the items woven in Wales, but actually we fell at the very last post, mainly to do with sort of due diligence and that sort of thing, which is, you know, you have to sort of jump through hoops for a lot of the larger British brands. So, you know, unfortunate, but we will have a product, and I think it's actually really exciting. So as far as we're concerned, you know, we don't have a stock supported range in terms of weaving yarn yet. That would be a lovely place to get to, and actually probably at the moment we're running this Cambrian Wool in 3 different counts, in a 2/8, single 6s and a 2 6s. You know, it might be nice that we can eventually sort of go, right, this is the quality, and this is where we're going with it. And I would love to be able to run a, you know, a colour stock supported range, but you know, at the moment, you know, that's a long way off. So I just want to sort of one step back, really. I've gone my sort of the next time round, that when I ordered more yarn, I went back to my old way of doing things, which is the way we'd done it at the beginning, which was working with British Wool Marketing Board and Curtis Direct to buy the yarn. I was worried about quality going and what have you, but I do understand that you are now able to go via the British Wool Marketing Board and get you know, your own quality and everything, and traceability through the Wool Marketing Board. Again, I think it's all about quantity, and the problem is, and Ffasiwn and Mandy will know this as well, it's about money at the end of the day. You know, in order to get those higher quantities through and reduce the price down a little bit, you know, you've got to put quite a lot of investment into that to get it going. So, you know, a collaborative approach would be great, and I'm open to sort of any opportunities and what have you. I really don't know how many other companies there are maybe producing Welsh wool. You know, as I say, you know, my last order was 2 tons. It's not huge at all. So, you know, if we could all collaborate and maybe, I don't know if it could work like that, but, you know, I'm more than happy to help. And, you know, I've become a steering group member of the mewn project, which I think is doing great things for sort of raising the profile of Welsh wool. And, you know, there's a lot to do still, but I think we're all, you know, small steps. And I think, you know, we're all doing our utmost to sort of raise the profile, but certainly there are, you know, huge challenges. And as Jenny alluded to, there's a lot of different pockets, I think, of the industry, and whether we get everyone all together talking, I know Mentor are working very hard at that, but yeah, there's lots of opportunity still, I think, and yeah, I'm flying the flag. So yeah, thank you for having me to explain a little bit about it.
Thank you very much, Susie. Tamara's just put an interesting point in the chat. She said, can there be a local government option to buy from a certain distance to ensure local purchases practices now the UK has left the EU? For example, is that something to ask the Welsh Government to support Welsh provenance?
Well, certainly, I know Helen, she's double-barreled, I can never remember her surname, was part of the, getting the project going with Mentor and Mwyn. So maybe that's something that, you know, coming out of this project that could be discussed a little bit further.
Yeah, definitely. Can I ask you a question before we move on to the next sort of people, Susie?
Yeah.
What would we need for stock supported? What would we need for that to happen?
Well, it is initially about quantity. It's quantity of wool that you buy and process, and then, you know, I don't know what quantity actually per colour, Mandy, you actually buy.
Yeah.
We buy stock lots in anything from sort of, you know, 10 to 150 kilos, but if we want a special colour mixing, it's anything from 150 to 300. And, you know, initial conversations with spinners in Yorkshire is that, you know, if we can agree on a quality, then provided we're, you know, going to stick our hands in the air for 5 to 10 tons every 6 months, then actually we can get our own yarn made in our own quality and our own colours. And we could even go for dyed in the wool, so you could get blends as well as solid. So that, you know, it's not astronomical, but it just involves, you know, a lot of thought about how to manage it.
Yeah. Sure. No, thank you. Right, we're going to move on now to David, who is representing NFU and farmers. He's going to be speaking about this from a farmer's point of view, and then also about what needs to change to incentivise this a bit further for them.
Okay, thanks very much, Meg, and Siarad, very pleased to be able to join you, if only just to hear the first 3 speakers. And since I've been involved in this, and the enthusiasm that's out there is absolutely incredible. And, you know, and as an industry, we really thank you for that, and hopefully things can move forward. And even in particular about the history lesson, I'm speaking to you now 12 miles north of Dolgellau, which used to be the wool capital of Wales, how things have changed. But, you know, we also, I think, must move on with the times, really. And one thing I will say at the start, you know, you won't have any shortage of wool from Wales. You know, numbers of sheep do fluctuate, but at the moment we've got 4.9 million breeding ewes here in Wales, and really interesting to see what Susie says just now about lamb wool, or was it Mandy? I think you said about lamb wool, and you know, we could supply that as well. You know, because you know that you get it from abattoirs, etc. But you also get it. You can actually just August and September. You can actually shear the lamb ewes, and you potentially you could get that, and some actually do that really. So it's something I think if there is a demand there, something we certainly would be really interested in getting more of that done. But I think you are aware of statistics, but I just thought I'd just to remind you, in Wales we produce around 7.7 million kilos. That's 27% of the Welsh of the UK wool clip, and it's 8,600 holdings or so that produce that 7.7 million. And really interesting what you said there, Susie, about the what you buy in 2 tons, and you'll be interested in this. The average supply of wool from a Welsh farm is 900 kilos a farm. So it's well under a ton, and I think potentially that case a bit of a problem, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And interesting, Jenny, that you are in Newtown, and it is Montgomery that leads the way in the amount of wool that's produced in Wales. It's well ahead of others, but Radnorshire and Breconshire are also following. So you are really in the heart of Welsh wool production there, and it's really good. But I think the other thing that we perhaps just need to remember, in world terms, we're not huge. There's an estimated 1.1 billion sheep in the world, and China obviously is the biggest producer by far. But as I say, times change, and there were times when wool, milk, skins, manure, and tallow were as important as meat from sheep. But now, of course, the important product is our great PGI Welsh lamb, and I think we really have to bear that in mind. But how things have changed, because on the wool, for example, people used to go out and pick wool off the fields. When you had a dead sheep, they used to pick wool off that. So valuable was this product. And what we've got to get back somehow, we have a really great product here, and in this times and age, it's unbeatable really, because it is fully biodegradable, and I think that's the message we have got to put to government all the time in supporting us here. But herein lies the problem, because if I can just, I'm an optimistic, and I want things to move forward so much. But there is an issue here, obviously, if you look at pound, shillings, and pence for a farmer, and the return from wool. We look at what you call the gross margin of a sheep, and the contribution of wool towards the gross margin is somewhere between 2, 3, 4% of that margin. So that's where we are at the moment, and I think we've got to look at, even if we double, triple the value of wool, it still would not be anywhere near the value that we get from meat at the moment. But that's not to say that we should not be doing something about it, and I'll come back to that perhaps at the end. And the other one, there's two things when you're considering sheep production. I think you've got to have a breed that's suitable for where you live and the farm that you're on. And also, you have got to have an ability to produce a marketable lamb, which is now becoming a very, very discerning lamb meat market. And if you don't hit specifications of that, then your price will go down. And it's not always possible, unfortunately, to get a sheep that is really good at producing wool and good at producing meat as well, and can live in some of the really harsh and wet areas we've got in Wales. And because the other one, of course, for you as people who use the wool is, of course, is the camp. and particularly in our Welsh mountain sheep. My son here, he's the farmer. He keeps Welsh mountain sheep, and the amount of camp in his fleeces are quite significant. That's both white camp and also obviously the red camp as well. So that creates problems in staple length, obviously, and taking the dye, etc., etc. So it is an issue we certainly would have to look at and consider on this breed. So they've been developed for the conditions, and the other one is the breed numbers. Rightly or wrongly, we've got in the UK about 60 pure breed of sheep and a huge number of crossbeds of those. That in itself might be good, but it does create problems in the sense in the consistency of a product. And I'm afraid areas like New Zealand, they beat us on that because their sheep are much more similar and they can produce a grade of wool in much higher quantities. Now, the other one, and you've touched on this, I think this is hugely important, is what is Welsh wool? I think my suggestion, rightly or wrongly, it is wool that is produced in Wales, not necessarily for certain breeds in Wales. And I think provenance is becoming more and more important. And I think you said, Rosie, that we're really supporting this, that the Wool Board now are looking at traceability, and that's good. And because the customers want traceability, not only wool, they want it with everything. And that must be a positive thing in moving Welsh wool forward. And we can even have tests now which will prove if that wool is actually from a sheep raised in Wales. HCC uses it to some extent with Welsh lamb. Now the other important one, I think, is wool processing. We produce a raw product, but that wool has to be processed for yourself. I would, more than anybody, I think, would like a large Welsh wool processor in Wales, but I don't think that is actual reality, if I'm quite honest. Because I've talked to a lot of people, I look at businesses, and there are two issues with it. You are dependent on a huge throughput. The two big ones up in Bradford, which Mentor Warner taking me next week or the week after, they run more or less throughout the year. They're based on throughput, and the margins are quite tight, really. And the other big issue we've got, and I had a meeting on this yesterday, is actual regulation surrounding the disposal of water that you use to wash on them. So where that processing plant goes would be difficult. Obviously, I mentioned where the sheep are, and I think it makes sense if it does come, it will be somewhere in that area, because you're reducing obviously your transport cost then. But I don't want to put a damper on it, but I am quite worried about the actual feasibility of getting a large, I mentioned large, wool processing plant in Wales. I don't think there's any problem with having smaller ones, but we would question that. Now, that's not to say that that it is really important that the wool you take up to those two plants up in the north there are actually processed and can distinguish between the Welsh wool there, and I think that's hugely important. And I think the comparison I draw here is PGI Welsh lamb. PGI Welsh lamb has to be born and grazed in Wales, but it can be slaughtered in approved abattoirs outside Wales, and will still retain its PGI status. And because we have not got the capacity to process it all in Wales, and there's a bit of a parallel which we need to think about and develop. As I said, the traceability is hugely important, and that's what I really interested in what you were saying here is adding value. Because the same, for us, adding value is if we are hope of increasing prices, we have to add value, the markets we talked about now are the real value markets together with the carpet markets, and keep knocking this message of the brilliant environmental credentials of this wool we produce, and I think we have to keep knocking on the door of that message. And really interesting, I went on we had a meeting through Mentor More again in Llangollen the other day, and I took one of my son's fleeces there. Well, basically, it's a Welsh mountain fleece from an old ewe, and they looked at it and they said, we can use part of this fleece for what we want, and we can't use it part from what we want. So, what I think we need to look at is the possibility of using different parts of our fleeces, if at all possible, to hit different markets. We talk about things in the lamb market in particular, what we call carcass balance, and that's where processors make their money in that they can sell all the carcass to one market or another. Now, I just wonder if that's something that we should consider in the wool as well. And there are other markets out there with wool now. You've got tree guards, you've got wool in use for use in the gardens, etc., etc. So there are other potential avenues there, but obviously they are not as high value as some of the markets you've been talking about up to now today. And I was really fascinated in that, and I just wondered, because we have, and as producers, we also have a responsibility, and I fully accept that. And I think, we do, and Wool Board really do run really good shearing courses, and the quality of shearers now is excellent, but perhaps it's time to extend those to handling wool as well. We put wool in sacks. The tendency is to put use one sack and put everything in. I think times have changed on that now, and I think we should be putting ealing wool, for example, in one sack, lamb wool obviously in another sack. And I think, as producers, I think we've got a role to play there. And if producers can recognize and sort out the wool themselves, I think it is adding value and not just leaving it to the Wool Board to do it for you. And the other one, of course, I have to raise is a shearing cost. It's cost now about £1 a sheep for Welsh ewes up here, £1.40 for the bigger ewes down country, and it has to be done for welfare reasons. But the reality is, Welsh wool is currently about 17 pence a kilo. So you are shearing at a significant loss. But if and I think the initial target for us definitely is to cover the cost of shearing. But there are the average price wool now is about 40 pence a kilo in the market. But there are exceptions. Blue-faced Leicester wool, for example, is £15 a kilo. Which is how many times more than Welsh wool, which is significant. Dwicks, they've been quite clever actually up in the Lake District. They've got an agreement with, I think, one of the manufacturers to take Herdwick's wool, and they push their prices up significantly because and that's the way it has to go really. And we still, and if you could, and myself, we strong believer in the importance of the Wool Marketing Board. I think we need to keep working with them, and I think they are coming to work more with us as an industry now, which I think which hasn't happened in the past, and I think that can only be a good thing. And they also, we've got to remember. You mentioned, Meg, that you were lived in rural Wales. Well, so do I. I'm looking at the A470 now as I speak to you. But it's so important that you have these businesses in rural Wales, and if wool can be part of that and adding value to those that you do, that would be good. So, I think that's where we're coming from on this one. We realize at the moment it is low value in monetary terms, but not low value as a material at all. So I think that's what we've got to address and get more and more people to recognize that, including government, I think. So I'll stop there because I think I might have gone over my time.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
You're welcome. I've got a couple of things to read out in the chat. So Tamara's just saying, how do we deal with the Australia-New Zealand trade deals and the incoming influx of Australian wool and sheep products? That is why I would suggest a policy of local procurement in combination with a campaign which highlights and promotes Welsh wool as soft and fashion forward, and the sustainable aspects too.
Can I mention something with regard to that one?
Yeah.
I was interested in what David said about Herdwick, because we've heard Blue-faced Leicester mentioned before, and obviously Blue-faced Leicester, very high quality wool, but Herdwick isn't in that sense a high quality wool. It's a very specific wool. It's quite coarse.
It's horrible to weave. Absolutely.
Very difficult to weave, but it's got a value which, as I think David mentioned, is to do with the marketing of it. Now, it may be that we have a problem with Welsh wool, some Welsh wool, not all, in terms of quality or difficulty to weave, but it may be that it's the marketing of that. And why I mention it now, and I'm sorry I interrupted, was because that the point in the chat is the same thing, really. It's the idea of provenance. And I think that's where Herdwick wins out, in that you think of Herdwick as being a specific type of wool, possibly from a specific place. I don't think it is, but Herdwick's associated really with the North, with the Lake District, a beautiful scenery with sort of very good-looking sheep, so to speak. So I think there's a lot in there that we could explore.
Thank you, because Herdwicks are a really interesting breed. They are a real hill breed. They don't normally breed until they're in the second season. They don't put them in when they're 1.5 years, 2.5 years before they breed. And it's really interesting. They're born more or less black, but every time you shear them, they go a bit lighter. If you saw a 10-year-old ram, you think he could be a Welsh ram, because they're more or less white by the time they're that age. And it's just really interesting how they've done it. They've solved a story, they've solved provenance, and certainly, I would agree on the quality, certainly no better than the Welsh Mountain.
Yeah, we're about to hear from the Wool Library just after another speaker shortly, and they're going to be talking quite a bit about that connection between specific breed diversity and the ability to market it. So that'll definitely come up shortly. The next person on our chat is Kerry, who deals with the leather side of the industry. And there was quite a lot of parallels between, we sort of had a chat, and there was quite a lot of parallels between what's happening in the woolen industry and also the leather industry, which I think is quite fascinating. So yeah, Kerry's coming on next.
Yeah, hi. Apologies, my video seems to have stopped working for some reason, so we'll just have to deal with a blank screen.
No problem.
There's my blushes anyway. I'm Kerry Senior. I'm Director of Leather UK, which is the trade association for the UK leather industry. So slightly, an outlier for this group. But as Meg said, I joined a Fashion Roundtable meeting in July, I think it was, where we were talking about issues around wool. It's clear there's a lot of parallels for wool with sheepskin and leather made from sheepskin. A lot of very similar issues, and certainly some of the things that David has said ring very true. What we have in the UK briefly is that sheepskin have very low value, if any at all. Huge numbers are being thrown away, which is a terrible loss of a very versatile natural raw material, and obviously that has implications for farmers, rural communities, the potential to utilise these raw materials for creating jobs and wealth in places that desperately need it. essentially, the UK produces around 14 million sheepskin a year, as we're one of the largest producers in the world. And once they used to have real value, the market for UK sheepskin collapsed in the 90s when Turkish buyers withdrew from the market because of falling demand in Russia. And prices then fell from about £11 a skin to 50p a skin. At that point, the Chinese entered the market, bought up most of the traders in the UK, most of the businesses in the UK, and have established an effective monopoly. They are interested in skins for double face. So that is leather with wool on, the kind of things you'd see in flight jackets and the like, for which there are probably about 7 million good skins a year. But that is sold at the price that they are willing to pay, which is, given that they have a monopoly, very little. The remaining skins, for the most part, have no value. Most are thrown away. We are not sure on the exact number that are being thrown away, but if you try to extrapolate from the export figures, it's probably in the order of about 2 million a year. Which is a staggering number. Disposal is expensive. It either has to go for rendering or for disposal as a category 1 waste. For the larger abattoirs, it's less of a problem. They are effectively giving them away at zero return, but no cost. Smaller abattoirs are really struggling because they are paying up to 75p a skin for collection as a waste. So what we're seeing here, obviously, is a very what should be a valuable raw material is just being disposed of as a problematic waste. Another issue, again, another parallel with the wool industry, in that processing capacity in the UK has been lost. So when I joined the leather industry, there were a number of what are called fellmongers. Those are tanneries that take sheepskin, remove the wool, and make sheepskin nappa leather. In the UK now, there is only one tanner left of any size, producing wool-on skins for rugs, luxury car flooring, and things like that. And there are several very small tanneries, literally 2-man bands, producing wool-on skins in very low numbers. So of the 14 million skins we're producing in the UK every year, we're only processing at best about 100,000 a year. The rest are either being exported at not much more than the cost of salting and transport to China, some go to Turkey, or are being thrown away. There are a number of manufacturers in the UK, a very small number of manufacturers in the UK, who are sending UK sheepskin overseas to be processed and then re-importing them to make product. But it's a drop in the ocean against what's not being processed. Re-establishing sheepskin processing in the UK would be very challenging. And again, this is a similar parallel with the scouring industry. The traditional process is very dirty. It's labor intensive, so costs would be high there. And given that the traditional market for sheepskin leather is fashion, which is very volatile, obviously, it would be very difficult to have a stable business model. Our material is also expensive compared to the rest of the world. So, for example, one of our members who does make sheepskin slippers, wanted to use British material, found that the cost was simply too high. They could get processed sheepskin much cheaper in Portugal. So whatever we do, there needs to be a new model. That model would not have to be dependent on the leather. And I suppose what we have to remember here is that sheepskin is collagen, which can be made into leather, but it's also grease. There's a lot of greases in sheepskin, which you can process and use for different things. There is collagen, which you can use in food manufacture if you keep the skin within the food supply chain, which can be done. And of course, the skins arrive with wool on them. So there's also wool there, which gives you a range of products which you could then diversify what you're depending on to make a business viable. That's important because when you're making leather, you don't know what the quality of the skin is going to be like until you've taken the wool off. And in the conventional process, by the time you've done that, there's nothing else you can do with the skin. You either process it or throw it away. So we are looking at different ways where we can sort of assess the quality of the skin before we've taken the wool off, or by taking the wool off and still keep it in the food chain, so that other options become available. So that then you have the ideal world situation where you only process the best skins to make leather, which then will have value, and the lower quality skins can go into other destinations. So we are at the very, very early stages of looking at how we might reinvigorate the leather process. We're going to be working with the Institute for Creative Leather and Technologies at the University of Northampton. There has been enormous steps forward taken in leather processing chemistries in recent years. So it might be that there's a more sustainable, cleaner way of turning sheepskins into leather. If you can do that efficiently and you can make a product that meets the needs of users, then obviously you just need to attract investment. And in the current world, leather, wool leather, and sheepskin ticks a lot of sustainability boxes because it's a renewable and inevitable byproduct of another industry. As David said, these animals are not reared for leather or wool, they're reared for the meat. That's the prime value in the animal now. It's long lasting, it's versatile, and at end of life it will biodegrade. In the UK, we have the added story that we have some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, which is increasingly important. And we should be able to establish very good traceability. So you then have the whole story from farm to finished product, whatever that might be, being transparent and UK based, which would be very, very attractive to a lot of people. So, I mean, obviously there's, as we see, there's a lot of parallels there between what's happening with wool being thrown away and skins being thrown away. And it just seems that there should be some common opportunities, there should be some synergies between these two materials to try and find a way to reverse what's happening. I think it's probably logical that they should be considered together. So, you know, programs are looking at what can be done with byproducts from sheep rearing, then putting wool and leather into the same pot to add value would make sense. And if there's something like that's happening, I'd be very open to talking about it. Okay, that's all from me.
That's fantastic. Can I ask you a question? So what would your vision for this be? I know that you're also based in Wales. Is there a way of working with localized sort of supply chains closely within that realm?
I don't know at the moment because we're still, like I said, we're still at the very early phases. But what I'd perhaps look at would be an example in the UK in the bovine leather sector. The biggest leather producers in the UK are in Scotland, and they have a fully traceable leather because they source 98% of their hides from Great Britain or Ireland. They can tell you, for the most part, which farm they came from. And they process it through one of the most advanced tanneries in the world. They are moving towards net zero in terms of carbon emissions. And they are also going to be at zero waste by 2025.
Okay.
So, and that is a huge selling point for them in terms of their customer base. So you can imagine a parallel with wool and leather, as I said earlier, where if you've got that sort of regional specific sourcing of the raw material and a very transparent supply chain and manufacturing, you'd have something there where obviously the big issue you always come across when you're talking to people, you know, the likes of the John Lewis and what have you, is that for all the high words on sustainability, price is the determining factor. But we know that consumers are willing to pay more for products that have clear, sustainable characteristics and a good story. So if you can provide that, then perhaps you create a market where you've got, in spite of the additional costs of working in the UK, you can make something that people want. So it's a bit chicken and egg. You've got to be able to produce the product to get the demand, but you probably can't afford to get the demand to make the product until the demand is there.
We've just had another couple of questions pop in, actually. So one is David's agreeing with you, saying very important to increase skin values as small abattoirs are now really struggling, and anything to help their income reduce their costs would really help. And then Jackie's also said, is there an issue on size of skin as bovine are used widely in home and cars, etc., due to size?
There are huge distinctions between bovine and ovine skins, and size is one of them, thickness is another. They have different strengths and performances. generally speaking, people tend to think of sheepskin as only being used for clothing leather, but you can make leather goods out of it. You can make footwear out of it. One of the advantages of going into something like footwear and leather goods is that they are a much more stable market than fashion. And it's that way, obviously, then if you're making a leather, you've got at least got to probably be able to forecast how your business is going to perform, or where things are going to go. Which, if people are looking at investment, or if you're looking at for government to support it, you can present a model which looks like it will work. Yeah. Also, I mean, there's probably, I mean, again, talk about the process, the improvements in process technology. You know, there probably are other ways now that you could process sheepskin to give them better functional performance than we perhaps expect them to have. So that's all part of the raft of work that needs to be done to try and, you know, add value to it, and perhaps get people to give it a second look.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. We have 2 speakers left. There's been a slight change to the agendas. Zoe, and I'm hoping Zoe and Maria will be able to come on first.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you all right to let me share screen?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Is that okay, Ellen? They're from the Wool Library, and they're going to discuss a little bit more of what we've all been talking about, really, that connection between the provenance, the whole provenance story between diversity of breeds and that narrative.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to talk very, very quickly, just to sort of introduce why we started working together, and then Zoe will talk about the Wool Library. So I'm from a farm in the Lake District, so it was quite interesting hearing what people were saying about Herdwick. And obviously there's a lot of Herdwicks here. So my job on the farm, I'm from an art background, and I joined my partner who's born and bred Cumbrian farmer, and I was looking at ways to increase income on the farm so we didn't have to have a job off the farm, as a lot of hill farmers kind of need to do because there's not much money in it. And so one of the ways we diversified was to do stuff with our wool, and that's led me to doing stuff with Herdwick. So this I just had made for my partner, which is John in that picture, which is a Herdwick, a shepherd sort of jacket thing. And yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important, the marketing. And it was interesting when we've had discussions with brands that are very much about the price of the raw product. They want it super cheap. And I think, but what they're not taking into consideration when they're buying a wool like Herdwick or one with provenance from particular farms is that's the marketing. So their marketing budget should really be coming into that as well, because they tend to pay more for marketing than they do for the raw product anyway, and then they have to make up some stuff for their marketing, which, you know, isn't really based on a real story. But I think that sort of market of sort of globalized disconnection from the land and from the place where a product is from, there's been such a loss in story, but also a loss in, I guess, a responsibility to the product and to all the things that we care about, which is you know, environmental impact and things like that. So the provenance goes more than just being a nice story. It's actually about respect for the land. So I started working with Zoe because I'm quite limited in my knowledge of wool. I don't even know how to knit, but I just want to make more of our wool and also our local farmers' wool with what I do. And Zoe has a PhD in British wool breed characteristics. So she can talk more about what we do with the Wool Library.
Yeah. So we came together to we understand kind of the complexities of the chains, and what we want to do together is obviously kind of value everyone within that chain as well, to kind of understand the heritage and the different geographical locations and being able to match that with new technologies and the different qualities, because there's such an amazing historical narrative as well as characteristics of the wool that need to be kind of marketed, if you want to kind of come down to the terms of kind of traditional business. But at the moment, like everyone's kind of reiterated, it is a marketing ploy at the moment. And we kind of understand that need for re-education is just as important to consumers, brands, designers, makers, processors, as this kind of nice, shiny marketing thing at the end of it. And really kind of cutting into all these different sectors that wool also has an amazing power over. So how do we kind of integrate all this amazing information that is there, working with these different kind of places and celebrating those differences instead of kind of the global commodity that it's tried to, the global commodity that it has become. And understanding what the differences are, why the differences should be celebrated, and how we can start to kind of reiterate that into terms that designers and makers can use. So there's almost kind of those, kind of the mill we're talking about it before, about quantity wise. So kind of we came into it really passionate about wanting to make bespoke yarn with designers, and that is part of what we do. But also we understand that kind of 100% wool is great, but if we can start to lay those foundations of these breeds and making sure that the different breeds are going into the correct end uses as well, and have that kind of stock available for other designers. So being able to kind of collaborate with people like yourselves in order to access those greater levels of scale, in order to then start to individualize the process and the journey. So really starting to look into the blends, kind of networking with different producers to really kind of start to kind of forge some honest relationships as well. So the whole process is celebrated, not trying to kind of hide anything or greenwash anything. But also kind of the yarn sampling and experimentation is a really exciting kind of stage for it. So I know we're kind of really running short on time. So these are just a few of the projects that we've worked on, working with brands and taking them on their own wool journey, as well as starting to build up our own kind of passion of blending specific breeds, working with the British Wool Board, and celebrating the limited edition finite quantities of different breeds and making that into its own story and celebrating those quantities and being able to kind of understand how we could work that into a different way, and into a different kind of circular economy instead of this kind of running down to the pennies, so to speak. So we're quite a new company, and we've just launched our website. So if you'd like to find out more, you can visit thewoollibrary.uk. But we'd love to kind of chat more to anyone and everyone that's interested, and we'd love to kind of help out and build some more bridges between a lot of different sectors that are also passionate about wool, because everyone we talk to, it's, if you're in the wool industry, you're in it because you're passionate about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. I'm like obsessed with the work that you do. It's really great. Just connecting the designers then. So we have Ruth next from Herdwear, who has she's an SME. She's got Herdwear's the brand, and they're using British wool. And she's going to be coming on next just to speak about some of the challenges, I suppose, of working at that level.
Sorry, just before we go to that, Kerry, there's a few questions for you in the chat. I'm not sure if you've seen them. If you could just answer them in the chat for speed, that would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can see one, but that's it.
There's a couple, but anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Don't worry. Hi, my name's Ruth. I run, as Meg said, I run a fashion brand called Herd. I also buy the fleeces that I use directly from farmers in the northwest England, from Lancashire, Yorkshire, Cumbria, and Northumberland. I use only 100% blue-faced Leicester, which I understand has been talked about a little bit previously. Sorry, I couldn't make it earlier on the call, so I'm not sure kind of what was discussed in that context. Obviously, it's a luxury fibre, and it always has commanded a higher price than some of the other breeds. So yeah, so I buy it. I also do buy sometimes from the Wool Board, but I'm working less and less in that way. And as well as making the yarn, so then it's processed under our criteria, if you like. It's processed, scoured organically It's then dyed naturally using plant dyes, which is another area that we're innovating, working with a local dye house in Yorkshire to experiment, to research that, so that the end product is 100% biodegradable, natural and circular. And in order to, the reason that I originally was going to set up a hand knitting brand, because I'm a big knitter. But when I started to research the different options, thinking there's basically 3 options, aren't there? There's like a direct to, you know, as the Wool Library are doing, is working directly with brands to supply them with yarn. There's making hand knit yarn, and there's making fashion. And across the scale of, and I do all 3. So we have Herd Wool, which does knitting yarn and kits. We have Upland Yarns, which sells yarn directly to brands, and we have Herd, which is the fashion brand. And Herd obviously has, not obviously, but has the highest margin by a country mile, you know. And so it is the business which almost provides the revenue that allows the other businesses to kind of grow slowly and organically. So, and the benefits, what we found, and I know there's been a lot of talk since I've been on the call about marketing, and that's really what we do with the fashion brand, is we market the story of wool and the story of wool in the UK. We market the breed, Blueface Leicester, with a view to turning it into the next, you know, a British merino, obviously without the scale, but with the quality. We market the provenance story, and we market the natural processing, and those we consider to be the fundamental kind of building blocks of our brand. I think it's, I mean, not being a farmer, not being a producer myself, coming in at this from that perspective as a brand, it feels to me like it's an opportunity that is massively under innovated in. I think that brands, it's only really when you are direct to consumer that you can really do that education and create that research. So the majority of the work that I do, I consider myself to be marketing the wool story. That's what we do in Herd, and we do that via proving that it can be done, via proving that British wool, although I'm not massively keen on the term British wool because it's just so general, can be used for luxury knitwear. And not saying that it can be used for luxury knitwear, but doing it, you know, and articulating the story through beautiful branding, through like really soft, luxurious products that, you know, are equivalent to merino, and via, you know, really high quality photography and you know, lots of investment on social media ads, etc. I mean, it is expensive. There's absolutely no question about it. It's expensive to do that marketing, and it's only really from my experience in the fashion sector that you can see that the margin that allows you to do that marketing. We haven't got to the scale point yet, but the customers that we supply using with our yarn have got to that scale. And so I have, you know, I'm supplying a few British based but global brands who are ordering quantities that you know that give me an insight into how much they're selling. So I don't think I think just to kind of agree with everybody, really, it's definitely about the marketing. Marketing is definitely expensive, and the story's there. It's all there. I don't think the raw material is going to get any cheaper. So the hard work is in the marketing to educate people as to why it is more expensive. My last business was in seaweed, so I have a good background in trying to persuade people to take on board something that's kind of a hard sell, and wool's a much easier sell. But that's where I think the innovation needs to be, because the like, how can we tell this story really articulately and creatively? How, you know, in New Zealand, the government of New Zealand backed the development of the merino industry. In the mohair story in South Africa is fascinating because they were attacked by PETA about the animal welfare situation in South Africa. So the farmers collectivized and created a standard that would ensure that their customers weren't, didn't have to worry about that. There is an international mohair standard now. So I'm not sure I have an answer, but definitely from a raw material side, do we have the amount of fiber? We obviously have lots of fiber, but let's make it fit for purpose. Let's only talk about the wool that's going into fashion in the most articulate and precise terms. Let's not use the term British wool. It's not gonna win over fashion brands. And let's talk about all the other amazing uses for wool in general. And hopefully we can start to see the tide turning on polyester.
Ruth, I've just got a quick question here. If you're not going to call it British wool, what are you going to call it?
I mean, wool is wool, wool is wool.
So do you want to get into the provenance thing of the name? Like merino now has this, like, people know merino's been so successfully marketed.
Yeah.
The thing is if we're talking about biodiversity, which is my sense of what the breeding is, or possible rebreeding. I met the lady from Dorset Wool, and she has done rebreeding, and so has and another lady. I met them in Dorset. And she's got very, very soft wool that is a rebreeding program that she's done in 10 years and it was gorgeous. So the thing is if you don't call it British wool, but we've got many different wools and they're not merino, which is this kind of catch-all, how do we define it? Because
we have to use the breed, we have to be as kind of as specific and as precise as the merino.
Okay.
The merino story.
Maria,
it has to be blue-faced Leicester. And yeah, I think that's how the success of it is, because people love to know and understand
provenance,
that name. Yeah, but not just the provenance, the actual, the breed.
They buy into it because they feel that they're in the village with you, they're in the field with you. Yeah,
and then they've got something that they know about, and it's special and it's different, and it is special and different. Each one is special and different. And then you're looking at it like, you don't call cheese. Do you know what I mean? You buy the
cheddar
contrôlé, the one that's specifically from that region. Same with wine. I think there's a lot of inspiration from the food industry actually in provenance and fashion.
Amazing.
I think a couple of people agreeing with you there. Maria, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about there's definitely a connection with how food has and drinks actually have changed. How you wouldn't just sort of say a red wine, you would define it as Chardonnay or whatever, and you would be looking at, and anyone who's a wine connoisseur obviously would know where it's from, all the rest of it. So it is similar, and it can be similar with wool. I don't think there's any problem calling it British wool, but you can just go into detail about what it is. And I think also, like when I was thinking about the thing of Scotch whiskey, like the blend is very soft, and that was, that's just the sort of general one. But the people who are interested in the single malts, it doesn't really matter if they're harsh. They like it because the marketing is excellent. That's why they're drinking it. And most of them taste horrible, but so the romance of it that they buy it. And it's the same with the wool. I mean, everyone just touches and wants a soft thing. And that's what they think is what they want to buy. But actually, if you really love and are invested in wool, you can go beyond blue-faced Leicester, because there's so many other breeds that actually make a really good knitwear. Might not be quite as soft as blue-faced Leicester, but it doesn't have to just be about softness. It can be about the breed, and that's what you want to buy into. You want a Portland jumper, or you want a Castle Milk Murret. I mean, the image that Zoe showed, that's our Castle Milk Murret wool blended with a bit of blue-faced Leicester, but that's a luxury garment as well. So, and there's a limited amount of blue-faced Leicesters, and they're really hard to keep alive. I've got some, and they're a nightmare, and they're indoor sheep. So I don't think that that's sustainable. And I think if you can use more hill breeds, they're the best sheep because they live off practically nothing. They don't need inputs and they just thrive in a way that my investors don't. Yeah.
I was just going to say, is that perhaps where we stand above merino then? Because obviously we can't compete with that kind of scale.
Yeah,
but
there's no point competing.
Yeah,
there's no point competing with that. It's the provenance. That's what you're selling, and I think, you know, the Welsh wool, you know, that's just such a, there's so much there that people would want, and also that history of Welsh blankets, and you know, it's just lovely. And I think that there's loads that can be done with that, and Welsh wool could easily become like Scotch whisky, going on tours to look at we had some Black Welsh Mountain sheep and they're fantastic.
Can I mention something about British wool as well? I mean, I had realised, known for a while, but I believe that it is the case that British wool only has to have 50% of it to be British wool, which I find a very strange thing. I think I'm right, aren't I?
That is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know the percentage, but there's
only like
always
51% or something.
Yeah, I
like
think
that.
it has to be 51% of it to be British for it to be called British wool. I would have said personally that I think 100% of it should be British for it to be called British wool. But I agree that I think the term British wool, in my mind, certainly isn't as high quality as an individual, you know, Herdwick or Blueface Leicester or something like that. And I think there's a good case for looking at marketing, you know, on that level.
But I think, sorry to jump in, am I allowed to do that? Do I need to raise my hand?
No, that's
okay. Well, I just think we just need to be like, there's no other instance where you would take like a vast range of different qualities of something and call it one thing. And I think in the context of provenance, in the context of production, maybe it's useful, but in the context of industry and the end use for the consumer, a generalization is like really getting in the way. It's really problematic. It's really like stopping, you know, that consumers from actually getting into the story because it's so general. It encompasses the term British wool. And currently, we're talking about carpet wool, we're talking about insulation, we're talking about all these other amazing uses for wool. But if you want, you know, if we want to bring people on board here, we've got to make it easier. We've got to make it easier for consumers to get into it, and to use a phrase that could mean other things is just confusing. And the minute consumers, you've got a second of their attention, the minute it's confusing, you've lost them.
That's really great. Tamara, did you?
Yeah, because I have another meeting that I have to go to quite soon. I think this meeting's it's very, very interesting, very exciting. I think that if the CEO of Walmart this week is telling me that merino is soft and that we breed coarse wool, then we have a massive education piece that we need to do even within the established organisations. I'm sitting in London and I've learned so much. I mean, my family in Turkey, actually, my dad was a shepherd as a kid, so I have a visceral sense of it. Obviously they breed very different sheep, but I think this provenance story Ruth's on the money with that, because people buy into that and the luxury of it, and how we can support charging and it not becoming, much as I want to get some of that compost, it's not really the future, I think. I hope not anyway. The other thing that I want to just flag is, I think you're right on there for this naming thing, that's resonating, is black wool and darker wools are obviously really useful for people in fashion who wear dark colours, and yet that can't go into this mix. And I think what Ruth's talking about is if we can't segregate breeds and it all gets put into one, then it's really hard to support that provenance journey. So I think that will need a shift. But also I noticed what Jenny's saying in the chat, and I think we need to work towards next steps in the last few minutes of this. That would be my suggestion to Meg, just to because clearly there's a lot of talent and expertise in the room, and how do we support next steps as we go forward?
Yeah, definitely. So it'd be great to get, I mean, I was going to say exactly what Tamara has said. There's obviously an education piece, And then there's also lots and lots being sort of spoken about this provenance, but how do we sort of join up these dots? So, for example, we're sort of talking about localism, like sort of next, sort of that kind of supply chain as well. So I suppose, is it galvanizing funding support? Is that what people would like to see? Or what sort of success what does success look like to the group on this call, so that we can sort of take this forward? Because our output of this is going to be a report, in which case, you know, these will be flagged so that we can sort of take a look at this in a bit more detail.
If people haven't got thoughts now, Meg, my suggestion would be that they can send that as follow-ups to you, because it's hard to put people on the spot. But I know David has got his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Hang on, I'll start my video. Yeah, I would agree. In a really interesting conversation there about the provenance is, as I said, is so important, and I would tend to agree with this British wool term. And you know, branding is everything, but you know, our consumers, our people who will buy these products, need to be something to be instantly recognizable. And I just wonder, you know, if we need to develop a sort of a brand, because if I remember, some of the merino stuff has got a photograph of a merino on it, and you know, I would think things like that might well be helpful, really, so that the consumer instantly recognizes that as something which comes from a certain area. So I certainly would certainly go with that, and something we perhaps should consider. And I just sorry, Maria, my friend of mine, he keeps blue-faced Leicesters, yeah, and he tells me you need a short memory and a long spade, and you know, that's what he says about. But they are a really interesting breed. But I just wonder, you know, because we do use them in the industry quite a lot to cross as sires. So you know, potentially then, you know, the cross that they produce, you know, should you know, produce a reasonable quality of wool then. So you know, whether we should go for that, because you know, it is a very common cross anyway. See,
the brilliant cross. We cross ours actually with blue-faced Leicester, which with Castlemilk Murret, which is a rare breed and doesn't have kemp in its wool.
Yeah.
So you get a longer staple length because it's quite short, the Castlemilk Murret. You get an amazing lamb, you know, from a very small kind of primitive breed sheep. And the wool is just absolutely fantastic. I think it's a really great breed, actually. We've called it Castle Blue. So Castlemilk Murret cross blue-faced Leicester. And there's quite a lot of people crossing blue-faced Leicesters with Shetland. And that, again, produces a brilliant wool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. Haldy's answered our question. So she said, in the case of labelling, there are 2 product logos where Shepherd's Crook mark is used, either 100% British wool, or for products that are blended with British wool, a minimum of 50% needs to be from British origin to claim it. Tamara said she'd be very keen for Fashion Roundtable to support any of groups that come out of this with, you know, mapping. But we're obviously looking at funding for that, as any, you know, as any business sort of would logically usually look at some kind of mapping of the sector before you know, lots of other things happen. Susie says Cambrian wool, oh yeah, she's just beautiful quality mountain sheep crossed with blue-faced Leicester. And Emily's saying, I think government financial support in a huge educational campaign about the sustainability of wool. Most people don't understand the textile makeup, their clothes and furnishings. Even people I know that are very mindful about environmental issues don't link it to their clothes and continue to buy synthetic garments. That's really interesting. I guess what I'm getting from this is that there's a real sense of everybody wanting to sort of collaborate. And I know that this is part of the Mentamon sort of scoping studies. So I think as a next step, we'll output the report, which will show some very key points and some action points. But in the meantime, if I put my email address into the chat again, potentially people can make some suggestions. That would be fantastic. We're very keen to support.
Yeah, just to add to what Meg was saying, so the Made with Wool project will be sharing the output of this and pulling together next steps. As with all our kind of scoping studies, there will be like follow-ups and how we can get people involved and what the next steps would be.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add? I think we've got another sort of 10 minutes. Happy to wrap up and then follow up via email after the call.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I've got Secret Life of Pets in the background.
I'm about to have that
came from
myself.
nursery.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the answer is. It definitely feels like, I mean, from a commercial perspective, I am working in very favourable commercial conditions. You know, there's, you know, the staff are well paid. They're, you know, everyone's on minimum wage as a minimum. Factories are very efficient. They're very well run. Yes, it's expensive fibre, but the product is excellent. I'm not having returns from my customers, either on the knitwear or the yarn side or on the knitting side. So I think for me, commercially, there's a huge opportunity for people who are interested in setting up brands around wool to go for it. The problem that I encountered at the beginning was the scale of the processing, obviously, which I'm sure you've talked about a lot. You know, needing to have a minimum of a ton into scouring, etc. does mean that there's a lot of upfront cash. And also just being up for, I think it's really difficult to be a producer and do the branding marketing side of things. So I don't know whether if you're a producer, you would really want some help on the marketing side of things. If you're up for doing the brand, you'd want some help from the producer side of things. I'm happy to contribute to kind of a follow-up email or group or anything, like throwing around brainstorming ideas, but I don't have any kind of off the bat, if that's helpful.
No, that's really helpful. I think there's a lot of like passion and ideas, and definitely a lot of common threads in terms of provenance and the diversity of breeds and celebrating that. I suppose it's then how we sort of progress that forward into the next sort of steps. But yeah, I think unless anyone else sort of has anything to say.
I think that's why we need the mapping, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Haldy's got her hand up.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Yep, I just wanted to follow up on this as well and just say regarding the labeling, just to the earlier question, saying that the reason we allow for that 50% is because we are not in a state where we can be precious over only labeling products that are 100% British wool. Even if a certain percentage of British wool is used with other wools or with other fibers, it's important for us to be able to highlight those products as well, as long as it's genuine British wool in those products. So hence that limit of minimum 50%, but then that label then highlights that this isn't a 100% British wool product, that is a blend with something else. And regarding a little bit to Ruth's point, saying that there's a lot of knowledge and support available from British wool, knowledge about the wool fibre, the types of products that the different wool fibres are good and suitable for, and of the supply chain. So anybody who has any questions, don't hesitate to contact British Wool as well and ask us for this information, because we're happy to share. We want to see everybody be successful making products using British wool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I think this has been hugely sort of eye-opening as well, because you can't know everything, and like hearing the history behind it as well obviously feeds into that whole marketing perspective and story, which I know that we've all touched on. So I think there's definitely massive potential within the fashion sector. It's just how we progress that forward now, but that's something that we'll take away and have a look at, if that's okay with everyone.
Jenny's just asked a question about connecting people together. I think that's something Jenny will go away and talk to Mentamon about as well, as how we can
definitely
address that, but also Mentamon have groups that they could hook you in with, which I know was put in the chat too.
Yes, and just to add that we will share it through the cluster as well, and it'll be on our website. So any kind of reports we do through the project and any scoping studies, they'll be available on the website as well.
Can we re-put if anyone's not in the cluster group,
yeah,
can we put that again just to make sure? Yeah, that would be fab. And then just a big thank you for your time.
Yes. Yeah, I also want to say thank you on behalf of Fashion Roundtable. And what I picked up was that the Wall Library and Herdware and their beautiful websites, adding that kind of desirability, aspirational quality to this story, I think is key to that provenance, higher price point solution. I think you really are going to need that. I cannot emphasize my concerns about the Australia free trade deal enough and what that means for sheep farmers in the UK. I mean, that was my entry point into working with Meg on this, is being on the UK Trade and Business Commission, which I have to go to now because we're doing one on the FTA with Canada and the States. But thank you from our part, and Meg is obviously based in rural North Wales and is happy to go in. She's been seeing a lot of farmers on the ground, and thank you to everyone who came on our behalf. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to add, Ellen?
No, nothing else to add. Just say thank you to everyone.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so we'll end it there, and then a report will follow.
Good night.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.